I cannot stand choosing unknown careers. So I did not want,
give me all their salary and their car and, agree to my absolute bidding for the rest of their lives.
And they were there with their shirt and tie and their boxers.
Hi, I'm Siobhan.
I'm Annabel.
And I'm Anne.
And we are the Deal Divas, a podcast discussing all things negotiation. Welcome to episode 2 of the Deal Divas, and today we're diving deeper into some of the highs and lows of our negotiation careers. So, Annabel, what's the story you can share with us?
Well, yeah, since we recorded the last episode, I think it's kind of really got me thinking back to some of the experiences that I had throughout my career, but in particular sort of going back to the early days, which I'd probably kind of consigned to history. But in particular, I was reminded of a negotiation where I was saying I was a rep, basically the old-fashioned kind of sales rep as part of my first job. And I'd gone down to the southwest. That's what the area that I looked after. And in particular, I just remember going down to a town on the south coast, shall we say. I mean, this is a very long time ago, so I'm sure it wouldn't matter. But down to the south coast where back in the day, we used to sell, the big deals that we had were to go and sell pallets of oil. That was the currency. I have no idea if that's still the case, but we sold deals were done in pallets. And I had been given, as you do as a salesperson, the new deal to take out to my territory. And I'll be honest, it was one of these things, we often talk about packaging, how do you position something to make it hit the right sort of, the right notes. And I think we'd probably been a bit ambitious in the packaging of this. It was sort of, if you take off the VAT and you turn it upside down and you stand on one leg, then the price ends up as this. So I dutifully gone into one of these sort of car spares, they were called. So lots of a private little shop, gone up to the owner, who was a little bit tyrannical at the best of times. I'd met him a couple of times at this point. And I positioned, I thought, beautifully, this deal that I'd been told to position. I waited with my pen in hand to take the order. And he went just nuts, just absolutely furious, like just in front of everybody in the shop, tore me to shreds in front of everybody. And my cheeks burn now when I think about it. It was awful. I mean, it would, totally unacceptable, really. But I stood there and I took it and eventually must have said, well, that's a no then. Got back into my car and drove home and felt, kind of suitably chastised by that. And there's a few things that, come to mind now as I look back on it, which is, okay, was it in my positioning of it? Did it just not meet the way he viewed the world? Was he angry at me for that? I don't know. But it also makes me think, what else was going on? Because it wasn't a rational reaction. So if he didn't like it, he didn't like it, but he didn't need to behave like that. So I don't know what was going on behind all of that. And I never will, I suppose. But I do, in completion of the story, I went back the next day. I drove for an hour and a half the next day to go back into the store to have another go. And I don't know whether he realised he'd been a complete swine the day before, I don't know, but he did buy the pallet of oil and we did shake hands and we did part as friends. But it was just one of those where I couldn't have begun to imagine that was going to be the reaction of somebody, but was it the way I put it across, or was it just something going on? And I guess sometimes you just don't know.
Did you ever get the chance to ask him?
I certainly didn't ask him. No, I was just happy to survive and get back in the car. Maybe I would now. I was really just kind of out of university and wet behind the ears, and didn't expect, I guess, to be treated in that way. And I don't think people do, and I don't think they do these days, and they shouldn't be these days. I don't know. I'd be interested. These are the sorts of stories that if people wanted to email into us, I think it's deal.divas@scotwork.com, if they wanted to email into us with some of those examples, particularly if they're current, because there's a lot in the news about how we should be kinder and what now constitutes unethical that perhaps didn't constitute unethical 20 years ago when I'm describing this tale. It would be interesting to know what is normal out there now in that kind of respect. So
yeah, and I think I love one of the things I'm taking from that story also is that you went back again, even though you'd faced that treatment, and you know what you expected and what you got was very different. You didn't let it deter you. And often, you know, I've worked with people who are business owners or managers or people that are new to negotiation, and when they get a bad experience, it puts them off. But actually, you know, part of us doing this podcast is sharing the fact that we've all had low moments.
Yeah.
But how do you handle it? And most importantly, not letting it stop you from continuing or identifying with the problem. I know in my earlier career, I based a lot of my self-worth and my perception of my success on how well I did in my job. How well I did in my career. Did I get the deal and the margins that we expected? And whenever it was different, and as we know now, sometimes it's just that you need to repackage it in a way that works for both parties. But back then I was thinking if it was changed drastically, even if the value was similar, maybe I've done something incorrect. Maybe it's my lack of ability. And I think just separating the personal from the professional and being able to, you know, do that kind of look back at a negotiation and separate any personal offense or investment emotionally is really useful. So well done you for going back after what sounds like a really intimidating situation.
We can take from that I'm incredibly stubborn. I refuse to be beaten.
Persistent.
Persistent. Yeah, let's go with persistent. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because you say where there is the professional and the personal, but that felt very personal. You know, he'd embarrass me in front of a shop full of people. That is personal, whether you're discussing business or not. And you know, I took it to a degree to be personal. So you know, rightly or wrongly. So yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of make sure that I didn't lose my nerve almost. I thought, well, if I don't go in today, am I going to go back in 2 weeks or 4 weeks? Or am I just going to tell my boss that they've closed down and ignore them forevermore? And I you know, I wasn't prepared to do that. So, yeah.
And it's interesting, something like that was such a personal attack, the way he was doing it. We can take personally within ourselves, but actually that's personal about that person, that they would choose to communicate and conduct themselves in that way. Because like you said, you went there on a professional purpose. So the personal should be kept out of it. Unfortunately, not everyone does. But that says a lot more about him and his conduct. Or like you said, maybe there was something going on that you weren't aware of and you were the brunt of that. And with the shifts in society and as a whole, and like you said, articles and the news and this kind of encouragement to be more aware of how we're communicating, more inclusive, more considerate, I hope and pray that those sort of scenarios are drastically reducing. I feel like they are. But it'd be interesting to hear from people, like you said, what are their experiences? Is this still going on?
I was just going to say, I don't think that people that suggests him losing control of his own emotions, losing control of his own kind of ability to present himself as a kind of somebody who's got their stuff together. And I don't think people like to do that. So when I'm talking to people in the classroom these days and they say, you know, we deal with somebody who gets very difficult and so on, I quite often suggest just taking a little bit of time out, even breaking for a coffee or something, just almost to allow that person to tone down that tension. I mean, of course, you always get the people who do it because it works and they're just natural born bullies. But I think most people don't like to lose control of their emotions because it certainly doesn't present them in a great light.
No.
Definitely.
And it is one of those things that we also hear occasionally as it's one of the traits that as a female negotiator is occasionally highlighted as, well, I don't want to appear emotional in my response and I don't want to, you know, get upset. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. I think, you know, as you say, personal, professional, etc. But it's interesting how we'd like to keep the emotions out of the classroom, out of the, you know, negotiating room, the classroom, be what it may. But we are human beings at the end of the day, and it isn't always as simple, and we don't know what's happened behind the scenes. And, you know, again, it's one of those things that I'm always conscious of, particularly when I'm teaching. I'm like trying to get get too deep, but I often think I've got 12 people sitting in front of me and we're having fun and we're playing the cases and negotiating and people are taking it all on board. And I sometimes think I have no idea what's going on for you behind those cameras. I don't really know what the backstory is for people. And it's just, there's probably a whole other conversation to have about that. But it is something to be aware of, isn't it? We are, at the end of the day, human beings. And I don't know, as I say, what had happened to that gentleman that morning. I don't know.
Yeah.
I bore the brunt of it, and that's the way it goes. So I'm still here. I doubt very much he's telling the tale. It's more on me.
Slightly similar in a slightly different context. I was running a course many years ago, and I was quite new to the organisation. I was quite new to working as a negotiation consultant, and this chap was reading the paper all through the lecture inputs, all through the activities that we were doing. And when we were doing an analysis and debrief of the negotiation he'd been involved in, he put his feet up on the table and covered his face with the newspaper. And I remember this was years ago, and it was a law firm, and 90% of the people on the course were male, but there was somebody there from HR who was female a long time ago. And on the second day, I was kind of trying to tough it out. This isn't affecting me. This isn't bothering me, when actually deep down it absolutely was. But she came to me at the end of the second day and said, "I'm so sorry for the way he's behaving. He had a family tragedy a year ago this week, and he just doesn't want to be here."
Yeah.
And it's on with the benefit of hindsight, he shouldn't have been there. He should have, and as soon as that new piece of information came my way, it completely changed the context of how I felt about his behavior. So sometimes actually there is something about if you can get some information about what's going on for people, and I know you're not going to dive into, people's life stories, but it can often change the perspective. It can change the context around the way they're behaving, and maybe make it easier to manage.
That's so true. I had a contract we were working on, and we were outsourcing many aspects of it, quite a lot of it to the Philippines, because it was just, better financially, and they were very good at what they were doing and experts, particularly when it came to technology side of things. And just getting pricing in that was just far higher than we were used to. And to be honest, initially I felt a little bit offended. I felt like, I've been bringing a lot of work to you, and the business is going well. Have you just decided to triple your price just because of that? And I thought, okay, Siobhan, a little bit of ego there. The fact you feel offence means you've taken it personally. So let's step back. What might be going on here? So I actually, because I've been working with that person on multiple projects over the years through different partnerships, and I'd brought them on a year before, connected them for this and recommended them. I just had a kind of, I just said, let's just have a chat, kind of offline sort of thing, and said, how are things? Just tried to have a chit chat, find out information. Turns out they were in a really difficult financial situation. A family member had become unwell and had to stop work because of a disability. They were trying to value what they were bringing based on pricing that you can get in the UK and the US for the same services. And they were saying, well, we do the same quality, so we feel we should be asked the same. And quite frankly, I need to double my income minimum starting now. So this is why I've put it out there. And, I've done a good job for a while, so I'm sure I can just argue my case and get the same price as their funding in the UK and the US. And it was just really useful perspective. And I was able to speak with the person about, that value perception and the other competitors, but also not just the quality of the work. But if we'd have gone to the US or the UK, there are other aspects of what those providers would bring that is beyond just the output of the product at the end. And just to help that person get more value and create an additional contract that I could bring them into that could bring in more revenue using their skill set without making them, they were going to lose the contract because the organization were offended that they were charging the same price when relative to cost of living over there, it was just such a high price point. So I'm really glad that I took that kind of conversation offline, and it helped the fact that we had a collaborative relationship up to that point. I think if you have that trust and that collaboration, it enables you to have conversations that aren't possible otherwise. And they did self-disclose because they were used to, in the past, when they share information, I didn't ever use it against them. we kind of collaborated,
Mm.
and it was useful. It meant that we did pay more than previous projects with that individual, but it was significantly less. It was only a little bit more, but
Mm.
we put them as our preferential provider for a side contract. So we did help them, and I introduced them to somebody else I knew, and they covered up the rest of their income that they needed for them and their family from this other introduction I made, and we kept our profit margin, as we wanted it to be.
And it's interesting that you say in there, Siobhan, when we got information from them before, we didn't ever use it against them. And
Yeah.
I hear that as the number one fear of people disclosing information to another party. If I tell them this, they'll beat me up for telling them.
Yeah.
So I think if you do want to help people to feel comfortable sharing information, then there's almost got to be that degree of integrity and trust that if you share information with me, I'm not going to use it against you. I'm not going to use it to beat you up. I'm just going to use it to give me an understanding of the context that sits around the situation that we're in.
Yeah,
Mm.
100%.
It's interesting. You were talking about the Philippines, and we were talking earlier on about different cultures, and we kind of started this with talking about highs and lows. I remember a situation a number of years ago where I was working overseas in various markets, and I was in Turkey in a negotiation, great big boardroom table. The negotiation had been going on for about an hour. Everyone around that table negotiating in Turkish, and I didn't speak any Turkish, don't speak any Turkish. And about a minute before the time that we were kind of supposed to be wrapping things up, somebody turned to me and said in English, "So is that something you'd be prepared to sign up to?" And I'd obviously sat there for kind of 58 minutes, smiling, nodding in all the right places. But it was a complete disaster because I had to be able to sign up to it. But I hadn't understood any of the conversation. And in terms of very basic principles, had I simply structured their expectations at the beginning of the meeting, look, can we conduct this in English, or can somebody translate for me what's going on? We wouldn't have wasted everybody's time. So for me, that felt like that really was a personal low, because I just thought, gosh, and it was interesting because I was being hosted by a distributor, and the meeting was in the distributor's office. And I felt it was their duty to tell people at the meeting that I didn't speak any Turkish. But actually, I suppose as it was going on, I should probably have just stopped my hand up and said, "Any chance of a bit of English here, folks?" No idea what you're talking about. And I felt like a right chump at the end of it when somebody said, "Can you sign up to that?" And I said, "Well, actually, I've not got a clue what you've been talking about." So very often it's the simplest things that create for me anyway, when I look back on my career, when it's the simplest things where it's all kind of unraveled and could have been so easily fixed.
Mm. And it's that cultural nuance as well, isn't it? Sometimes it's like, who should say what, who should be the one to lead this, what is the kind of etiquette around this? It reminds me, some of the projects we were running with different teams in the Philippines, I remember we were having a kind of a bit of a meeting to talk about how are things going, what's working well, what can we do differently, some of the things we need to improve, and also a moment to kind of praise and thank them for the great parts. So we thought, oh, that's a brilliant idea. This will boost morale. We can, compliment them on the great things, and then start to talk about, this isn't quite working. What would you like us to do to help? Thinking, very, very inclusive way of approaching it, because that's apparently what you need to do a bit more in business these days, without allowing for the fact that there was a cultural difference here. And actually, we were thinking, why is everyone saying, yes, it's fine, and nodding and saying thank you so many times, when I know there are problems here, and I know there are certain people that aren't happy or overstretched. That's why their quality is dropping. I've heard that they're being told certain parts of the project 24 or 48 hours before, and it's not possible to execute in that time frame. And then they're getting in trouble with me because I'm the one coming back and being like really unhappy about the quality here, and it's too close to when we're going to market this. So I was thinking, what is going on, and did a bit of a kind of research into a bit more cultural understanding, and just realizing that because their manager was on the call, culturally it wasn't appropriate or acceptable for them to be giving negative feedback or complaining. And that actually from then on, I kind of took the phone call offline, I had the chat further with the manager and said, this is the approach I brought, and we're encouraging that a lot in our business and also kind of in the society over here, that is a shift to be more inclusive, less intimidating. But actually, I understand there's a cultural difference. And then we just had a really frank conversation when nobody else could hear, and heard a lot more of what was going on. And then I was able to be like, right, I'm going to be really direct about the things that I'm not very happy about, because, you know, and maybe you can explain to me, you know, what's happening. And we were just able to speak really honestly. And then we adjusted the way we went about it to communicate that with the team and to make them feel heard and valued. And for me to put kind of a bit of pressure in the right place that still had a respect for cultural differences.
It's interesting when you're talking about cultural things. It just reminds me. I went to work in Croatia for a number of years in 1996, just after the war finished, and it was the time of that there seemed to be a growing awareness of the benefit of short meetings, and that it was kind of like the buzzword of the time. You know, no more of these kind of long, laborious meetings. They need to be short, snappy, to the point. So I thought, right, I'm going to adopt this strategy. And I went into a meeting in the distributor's office out there, and I thought, right, I'm conducting this meeting. It's going to be short, to the point. It was very, very short, and my counterparty in the distributor was an absolute delight to negotiate with. They kept nodding their heads, they kept saying yes, everything was agreeable, and so on. The meeting lasted about 15 minutes to negotiate quite a kind of a meaty deal. And I only realized afterwards, when nothing that we'd agreed was actually implemented, that they were saying yes and nodding their head and smiling because they wanted to be nice to a foreigner. They had absolutely no intention of doing any of the things that they were committing to. I could have been asking them to, you know, give me all their salary and their car and, you know, agree to my absolute bidding for the rest of their lives. And they would have smiled and nodded and said, yes, absolutely, that's fine. And so I learned that, you know, kind of short meetings are fine, but they need to have some sort of structure. You need to make sure that what you're agreeing is actually going to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And
I would
was
do it
there,
very
did you
differently.
gain any insight as to why they particularly want to be so agreeable? You said being nice to a foreigner, but was there anything else that was contributing
I
towards
think
it?
there was a desire, because it was just after the war had ended in 95, and there was a desire to try and rebuild quite a bit of the economy. And I was working for a global multinational and with a local distributor, and they wanted to do business with us. There was this kind of desire to, you know, get foreign investment and try and rebuild the economy and the country. And in their desire to be utterly delightful, I had misread that as everything's fine. So it delayed things, because months down the line, nothing was actually happening. I had to go back and ask all the questions that I should have asked the first time round, like, can this work? How can it work? How, you know, when can it be implemented? And all of those more detailed questions that I should have been thinking about, rather than just 15 minutes and we're out of here kind of thing.
I tell you what really strikes me in the conversation we're having here, and the things we're talking about, is that how much of it is about the agenda that's not at the table. There's so much broader agenda that's going on. And again, I think probably this is a topic that we need to explore. I claim to be no expert in AI at all yet, and I'm, you know, learning with the rest of us about what the implications are. But you hear so much about almost kind of like using AI to conduct negotiations and low-level small negotiations, and how will it impact the world that we have. And of course, you know, we're hugely interested in that and looking into it. But it strikes me at this point, how would AI take account of all of those factors outside of what's at the negotiating table?
The human element.
And the variables that are going to and fro are such a small part of the conversations that we've just described, you know, that are actually happening there. And I don't know how you program those in, if you like, into that. How do I put in the fact that, you know, that business is struggling, a family member's ill, that there has been conflict previously, and therefore there's a desire to open up to a foreign market? How broad will it go? And you might say to me, it'll be perfect, it'll do it just fine. But I think it's tricky. And I always find when people try to reduce negotiation to a sort of like a mathematical, logical process, it almost inevitably falls over, because I just don't think that's all that's going on. And I was involved a few years ago in a project with a university who were running a workshop, and I sort of did a piece there, and I stayed and watched some of the students involved in a negotiating game, as it was described. And it's hard to explain, but it didn't feel like a negotiation at all to me. It was just a complex mathematical haggle. We'll put it there, and then we'll divide by 6 and do some regressional analysis, and we'll put our position there, and then we'll go back and we'll put our position there. And as you know, somebody with probably far more years under their belt than the students in there, there's so much more that needed to be at the table to make that a game of any merit, really. It was more suited to kind of Countdown or Macara Waterman than it was sort of a negotiation. But you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I get that. But again, there's a whole other topic about AI and how it takes into account that. That's the human angle for me, is how do I understand what's going on? And if I don't understand or I don't know, how do I somehow try and take account? And it's a huge challenge.
It's almost like it's an iceberg, that what you're seeing at the negotiating table is essentially what's above the water, but there's all this stuff underneath.
Yeah.
And how does AI take account of the human factor?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it lends itself. We talk about so often people will say, well, that needs to be this way because it's rational, it's logical. These are my numbers. This is the data. This is what makes sense. And it may well do. It may make perfect sense. But, I still got to take account of the fact that there'll be personal preference, there'll be issues, etc., taking place. And actually, as I'm saying that, it reminds me of one of my frustrating negotiations from many years ago. I was, for a brief period, involved in the sort of the manufacture of crisps and snacks. And I was in category management for that for a while. And we were negotiating the contract for own brand crisps into one of the major supermarkets. That's all you need to know. But I was part of the team that was doing that. And you've got sort of the product development, the marketeers, and I'm in there with my stats and my graphs and all of that stuff, which I couldn't stand. I don't know how I did it in the first place, but that again. And we went through such a process, and we invested thousands in focus groups, tasting groups. We were there at the table finally for the negotiation. And there's little piles of cheese and onion crisps all over the table because we're here to decide on the new flavour of cheese and onion, which was really problematic because I cannot stand cheese and onion crisps. So I did not want to taste any of them at all. So I'm the worst person to ask. So I'm sitting there trying to pretend that this is life and death and it matters. Anyway, I'm looking at, like kind of cobwebs of different flavour profiles of cheese and onion. So anyway, point is, we present all of this information. And at the very end of the conversation, the buyer leans sagely back in his chair and says, I don't care, I like that one. And the whole decision was made on, I like that one. And I thought, well, that's what was the point in all of that? So if anybody wants advice on negotiating crisp flavours, then Deal Divas at Scotwork.com.
We kind of started talking about highs and lows, but we kind of morphed into the agenda that's not at the table, or the agenda that is at the table, but is unseen, the unseen agenda.
Yeah. And I think, it provides in some ways, if you like, the lows, the problem. But, to Siobhan's point as well, it also provides the opportunity, because if I can try and understand where the issue is and I can build a relationship where we feel we can have that conversation, then when you bring me a problem, if you bring it to me, it does provide an opportunity to try and shape a deal, an arrangement, to do the right thing. And, I very much hope that that's the basis on which I operate, with my clients. And all of us, for background in our roles at Scotwork, are responsible for working with clients. And that's kind of the way you would want it to work. If there's an issue, bring it to me and we'll try and find a solution to that issue. What's really difficult is when the shutters come down, the phones go dead, and I have no opportunity to try and work with you on a situation. So, it's challenging, but it's the reality of what's going on most of the time, is that there's something else beyond the 1 hour Zoom call I get with a client. There's a whole raft of other stuff that, I need to know some of it, or what's appropriate for me to know.
That's really interesting I definitely find it really interesting and what you've mentioned about AI and just that aspect of, what's going on, that will AI ever be able to grasp that? I don't know. I just did a recent article related to AI and negotiating. And so I was doing quite a lot of research. I was contacting some people I know who are kind of experts in AI and have AI companies, just to kind of make sure that I'm kind of up to speed with what's relevant. And one of the things they were really reiterating was the fact that AI, everything that we're assessing and drawing conclusions on now, is going to be so different because it's in its infancy. And they started sharing some really interesting information about I'm not going to use the technically correct words, but like the kind of tech or AI software or whatever the word is, how they are like and analyzing. Because one of the feedbacks we said is AI will never be able to properly do negotiation because it doesn't understand human behavior, nuance, and all those subtleties. But it's analyzing to such depth, not just the vocal tone and the language patterns, but micro expressions. And there's this whole point that now it's able to, because we have so many micro expressions that we don't, realize we're picking up on. And now AI is being trained to such an intricate level that it would be able to notice nuance of and it's got all these categories, so it's not just anger or frustration or tension, but depending on which part and which muscles trigger, that will indicate that it's tension related to anger, tension related to anxiety. And it was just like fascinating to start to read this stuff. So on that level, I was thinking, I can see how they're starting to put this case forward that maybe AI will be more accurate and efficient. And now we're having this conversation and I'm thinking, well, it might get the emotional context to a certain depth of accuracy, but I'm not sure how will it be able to integrate that understanding of personal circumstances. Or maybe that emotional tension that is related to anxiety isn't anxiety about this deal. It's anxiety because at 12:15 they need to make a phone call because this thing is happening for their relative who's now in some sort of home or something to their child. So yes, the AI
with their partner.
and you've just said that phrase that their partner always says, and it reminds them that they came home without the chicken last night, even though they said they were going to the shops, and now they're really peeved off because don't you tell me. To be honest, I was saying because that's what I heard last night, whatever it so, and is it, I don't know, is AI going to reach a point where it would start to, you can do the calls now, even on Zoom, and it will give you feedback on your phrasing, your tonality, things you're communicating. Yeah, it's amazing. But at the same time, will it start to track that and get a history per person? Because maybe certain mannerisms for either of us would mean different things, so maybe it would indicate that this person was less statistically positive and smiley and elevated in their tone than usual, although statistically their tone is much more positive than 3 other people you work with who are generally a bit more monotone or whatever. There's all sorts that can happen, but again, the personal aspect, I'm not sure. How would it ever know that?
And it's interesting, would you rather negotiate with a really kind of a really aware piece of AI software, I can't get it the right way around, AI software that is picking up on all of these subtle nuances, or somebody who's in the room but really is somewhere completely different? I don't know. Maybe
I prefer the human factor for sure.
Yeah, I would too.
It sounds horrifying trying to have the taking board. I'll have to wear those kind of goggles with all the information. I'll be like Mission Impossible.
I put some card up and just hide my face.
Yeah.
In case I twitch.
Make notes.
God.
World.
See if we can do that.
And touching on what we were speaking about earlier, actually, one of the things that I think I learned from my parents, just watching them in business, like growing up, is the importance of integrity. And that who you are as a person, particularly as a leader or as a business owner, stands a lot of value beyond what is happening in the world at that time, or commercially or circumstantially. And I've kind of carried that with me. And I think because I made that conscious choice to say I will make integrity a primary thing, it helped me choose to go down the route of collaboration. Now I'm very clear with my bottom lines, or what is and isn't acceptable. I'm okay with boundaries like that when it comes to negotiating. If something I can't do it, then I'm just going to be honest. It doesn't mean I'm just going to be a yes person. But I don't trust AI to have integrity if I turn around and say to them, they're not an entity, are they? To a software that actually this is what's happening behind the scenes. Whereas a person, I can build that trust and that relationship and see what are their values. And actually, if I share this piece of information, will they allow for that context, or will it be used against me? I did have circumstances where, we were working with people internally negotiating, and I, took someone aside because I was managing a team and just said, I'm just noticing that in, is it okay for me to share feedback? And they say yes, and then get permission first. And then I say, you're coming across as quite direct and a bit aggressive and angry recently, and particularly relatively to how you have been usually. Is it that you're trying a different approach? What is it that's, is there anything else that's going on, or anything that I can do to support you, or just to understand this quite shift in your delivery? Because I'm noticing in the last meeting that the other side seemed to be responding and reacting to your difference in delivery as well. So, what's going on there? And then they were able to share some personal things they were dealing with that, you don't know in that meeting.
I think AI definitely has a place, and huge benefits to society, but it's never going to be able to, well, I don't think, but I'm the least techie person in the world, but it's never going to be able to replace that human factor, that human interaction that is important.
Honestly, maybe I honestly don't know. I'm waiting to be convinced. It's interesting. I say I need to
I think
know
even if
more
it
about
can,
it.
I don't want it to. I want us to use it effectively, but I don't want to be replaced.
Well, yes, just
Well,
I mean, it's an algorithm.
Yeah, does that mean I can lie on a beach with a cocktail and swim in the ocean? Maybe.
Maybe bot out to do my job. Yeah, I mean, who knows? I really don't know where that will go. I'd hate for it not to be something that, there's a lot of Zoom out there, and that's fine too. And there's, some good stories about negotiating on Zoom. There's been people sort of storming off, and there was the person on the loo, was there not, at the beginning of lockdown, who was captured with their team nipping to the bathroom. And
what you were going to say there, Annabel, was captured with their. That you're going to say,
well, fill in the blanks, Anne. Fill in the blanks. I only had one person when we were teaching on Zoom a lot during the sort of the lockdown periods, and I only had one person's partner walk across wearing only a very skimpy towel across the back of the hall for us all to see. So that wasn't too bad. But I would miss it if there wasn't some element of kind of either face to face, or at least face to face via a screen. Which, I mean,
and it's often the humanity that we get, the light-hearted and the amusing and the entertaining moments, and very often in a negotiation that can actually decrease tension. It can help. I mean, I had a chap during lockdown gluing a head on a Frankenstein costume. I asked him a question, and he said, I'm really sorry, I've got to be honest, I haven't been listening because I've been trying to glue this head on this Frankenstein costume from my son. Okay, well, that's one of the more creative reasons why.
You know where you are, don't you?
Yeah, I had a funny moment online in a meeting. I was actually prepping a business owner. They were scaling their business, and they were pitching to a very large investor. And they were a bit nervous, understandably, because if they got this deal, it was going to be kind of transformative for the business. So we were on a call prepping, and it was just a bit flat, and it was just, we were working for a while, and I just said to them, look, we're 30 minutes into this. And as much as you are taking on some of the notes that I'm sharing, your energy is just so flat. I mean, tell me, are you tired? Are you hungry? And I've got you to sip water a few times so you're not dehydrated. What's happening? And they were like, I don't know. I just always sound a bit monotone. People just tell me I sound bored and it's just my voice. So I was like, right, I'm going to get you up. We're going to work on some techniques. And they looked a bit nervous. So what you're going to do is just, I knew their offices well because I'd worked with them a lot. So just turn the laptop around because there isn't much space there. And just go stand on the other side of the desk. I'm going to get you to stand up, I'm going to get you moving about, going to get your body going, and I'm going to get you to just engage a bit more with what you're saying. And they looked really nervous. And I was like, I know you're uncomfortable. Don't worry, it's fine. And they were like, yeah, because, I'm just not sure. Maybe I can do it sat down. It's not working sat down. So turn the laptop around and go and stand on the other side. We're doing it. Don't worry. It's okay to feel nervous. Let's just do this. Thinking I'm going to take the bull by the horns. Anyway, the reason why they were actually nervous of doing that is because oh, bless them, they actually did what I told them to do. They turned the laptop around, they walked around to the other side, and they were there with their shirt and tie and their boxers. Their tight boxers. So as they turned round, they were there trying to like pull their shirt down to cover his, crotch area. So
My word.
and he was kind of stood there like a bit wobbling from one side to the other, trying to turn to not show. And I just
so many questions.
Yeah, exactly. Why would you?
and in that moment I was just like, okay, I understand why you were maybe particularly nervous. That's all right. Just come and turn the laptop the other way around, sit back down, and we'll just figure out how to do it sat down. Oh God. So yeah, there's something about assumptions there.
Yeah. Assuming that people are wearing trousers.
Well, I've worked on that one for a number of years now.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Okay. Does it seem like sage advice if we hand out, which is, wear your trousers when you're negotiating, would seem like an appropriate place to draw this episode of Deal Divas close?
Yeah.
Indeed.
And if anyone has any embarrassing stories they want to share about business meetings or negotiations where they weren't quite appropriately dressed, feel free to send us something for fun at deal.divas@scotwork.com.
And none of us are standing up, so are we or aren't we?
Indeed.
Good thought to end the podcast on.
So that is it for the second episode of Deal Divas. Thank you for listening in or watching, and we will see you at episode 3.